Okay, this is just a quick one. I thought if I just post something every day, then, maybe you'll hear something without needing to listen and without me needing you to hear. And it's kind of how awareness kind of shifts and grows on its own. It's a bit like the butterflies that are landing on the lavender. We get glimpses all the time, but if we're not quiet, we kind of just brush it away without noticing. A bit like the video I put on about when I had that kind of moment of awakening to who I really am. But I'd had glimpses before that I hadn't recognized or noticed. And it was only because I was in a moment when I was quiet enough to listen that it kind of came alive. So this is a quick one about, and I'm just going to first start with Aesop's fable of the north wind and the sun, because it's just good to have that in the background. And it's when the north wind kind of challenged the sun to get a traveller to remove his cloak. And the north wind blowed and blowed, or blew and blew. And what happened was the traveller buttoned his coat more tightly. He did more buttons up and held on to it. And then the sun came out, and the sun shone and shone. And eventually the traveller loosened his coat, and eventually he took it off. And so if you have that in the background, it's kind of an illustration and of these two different spaces, of when we're kind of needing someone to listen and change, and when we are in that sort of space of acceptance, and it feels more like the sun, where we're kind of lighting up someone's path, but not needing them to do anything, and then they have a different experience, and it might occur to them, to take off that heavy coat of belief or identity or whatever it is that they're holding on to, and it's weighing them down. But we can't force someone. It's much more about kind of seeing where you are and bringing them into that space. And there was just one funny example that I just remember it because it felt so different. When I was, it happened to be with my daughter, but it could be with anyone. She's just she was the one who kind of, it's just an illustration. And she was about 13, and she was getting really reactive about a spider, and she was getting really, she has some thinking around spiders, and she was like, "Mom, can you get rid of this spider?" And she'd put it under a tumbler, and it was like, "Can you just do something with this spider?" And I thought, it'd be really good if I can teach her now. That wasn't a good idea. It's never good to kind of share this with someone when they're really reactive. And I was like, it's really, good to teach her now about thought and how we create. And I don't have any thinking around that spider, so it can't be coming from the spider. It's coming from your thinking. Can you see that I'm not scared of the spider, so it can't be the spider? Anyway, all this stuff was coming out of my mouth. and I was getting this reaction from her, which was like, she was just getting really cross with me. You're just not making any sense, and my friends are all scared of spiders, and you're not being helpful. And in that moment, I was, in my head, I was like, well, you're not even trying, and you're just not even, you're just. And then I kind of rolled my eyes, and I kind of muttered, you're just not getting this. Sorry, here's my dog. Can you see my dog's just coming for a cuddle? And I was like, and my other dog is sneezing. It's all happening. Hey. So I lost my train of thought. So I was like, you're just not getting this. And in that moment, she stormed off, and she was just like, cross with me. But in that moment, it occurred to me I looked away from my experience. I looked away from what was going on, and I kind of I often do, I just kind of went within, and kind of asked a question to myself. It's like I access this humility where I don't need to be right. I don't need someone else to listen, because before I'd been in that egoic space where I was kind of trying to get someone else to listen. I was in that egoic sort of separation, when we need to be right. And a bit like the north wind, trying to force awareness on someone, or trying to get someone to see something, and I was like, in this space of humility where there is no ego, there's no ego in humility. This opens up this space of nothing, where you don't need to be right, and you just see what you're doing. And I was like, oh my God, what are you even talking about, Kate? Getting this? You don't get awareness. Awareness simply lands on us. We become the awareness. We are the awareness. We always were the awareness. We recognize the awareness. It's all passive. It's all receiving. It's all, we don't get it in our heads. We don't manufacture it. We can't force it on someone. It's just recognizing who we really are. And it's, I fell in, nothing had changed on the outside. My daughter's still angry with me. The spider's still sitting there under the tumbler. And I was like, I felt so different. And I went back to her in this different feeling. And I went, are you hearing that you're failing at life? And she went, yes, that's what you're telling me. Isn't that what you're telling me? I was like, oh, yeah, I get it. I get that's what you'd hear, when we're kind of like the north wind and we're needing someone to listen, and we're forcing, and we're kind of trying to change their behavior, whatever it is. They do often hear that we're kind of, that they're doing life wrong, or that they need to change, and this present moment isn't good enough, and that, they're failing. And I said, what if you can't fail? What if none of us can fail at life? What if that's such an illusion? How do we fail at life? What does it even mean? And I said, what would life look like then? What if you knew you can't fail at life? How would it feel? And then this kind of space opened up where I started talking to her, and I had no idea where it was coming from, but I do now. But then I was like, here's a different thing. Here's a different explanation. I was like, imagine if there's something that I'm not scared of spiders, so that wasn't even fair. I kind of have some thinking maybe around maggots. And imagine if I'm cleaning a bin with maggots, and, it's crawling with maggots for whatever reason. And I might engage my thinking. I might bring all my thoughts alive about maggots, my experiences, the films I've watched with dead bodies, or, the horror films, whatever. And I can bring all of that alive. And cleaning that bin is going to be really hard. I said, or I could just clean the bin without bringing any of it alive. It could just all be there in the background, without engaging with any of it, without breathing life into those thoughts, without just letting them be there, just letting them float on by, just not paying attention to them. I can put my spotlight on them, or I don't need to. And then cleaning the bin is kind of, it's a different experience. It's kind of easier maybe. And my daughter, she was quiet, and she just went, well, yeah, that makes sense. And I sat there and I was like, oh my God. Moments before she'd been yelling at me, you're such an idiot, Mum. You're not helpful. You're just, and because she was hearing this, I'm failing at life. And then nothing had changed on the outside. And she was like, oh yeah. And she was accessing, this quiet space within her that was making sense, and she was listening, and it was kind of, that allows it to grow within her. But it didn't come from me forcing. It didn't come from me needing her to listen. It was in the absence of me needing anything in that moment to change. And in that space, change happens. And in that space, well, anything can happen. And so it's about noticing, are you north wind or are you the sun? And to be honest, we do both, we flip between. For me, sometimes my daughter says to me, how can you go from being all fixy and angry, because that's how I come across, when I'm worried or when I'm trying to change something. She said, to being all, light and nice, how do you just flip between the two? And I was like, because it's kind of the north wind and the sun. It's when I'm worrying and trying to change something, and when I'm accepting what is, and I'm back in the room. And there's connection again, where before there was separation. When we're sort of stuck in our egoic, realities needing to be right, there's so much separation. It's like, yeah, it's very different. So it's just noticing where you are, and I'm going to leave that with you and go and have a cuddle with my dogs. Bye.